Hey, everybody, and welcome to 412 Kids. I am your host. My name is Abby Mackey. I am a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette health writer. I am also a registered nurse with most of my experience in pediatrics. And when I'm not doing any of that, I'm probably in my garden, probably with my kids. And so that's why I'm so excited for today's topic on how to garden with kids well. We are going to address this topic from every possible angle. We're going to talk about the science that exists, and there's a lot of it, telling us why gardening, being outside, having your hands in dirt imply benefits to your physical health, your mental health, even socialization is improved by these situations. We're also going to talk about how these benefits apply to the adults and the children slightly differently. And perhaps most important of all, we're going to throw in a hefty dose of reality here, because if you have ever watched an Instagram reel or a TikTok about gardening with kids, you're going to see sunshine being filtered through trees and people frolicking in meadows and all of these wonderful things. And I hope that is your reality. But to be honest, it hasn't been mine. And there are a lot of things about gardening with your kids that can be sort of stressful, right? It cannot always be this super nourishing experience between parent and child. So, with the help of some local experts, we are going to figure out some best practices for gardening with children so that they feel enough freedom, you feel enough control, and everyone ends up eating well. So we are going to kick this off with Ash Emmerich. She is working on her horticultural therapy certificate. She's also kicking off a brand new horticultural therapy program with AHN. And then a little later, we're going to talk to Dr. Mark Miller and Gina Walter from the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden. But first, let's talk with Ash. Here she is. So we're joined by Ashley Emmerich, but she's super cool. So she goes by Ash, and I love that. She is working on her horticultural therapy certificate. She is a horticulture and garden educator through AHN. And this is all part of a program that is really just getting going. So, Ash, tell us what you guys are working on.
Yeah, so I was hired by AHN and the Chill Project. I work out of Northgate High School and Middle School right now outside of Pittsburgh. And basically, programming is meeting students where they're at and creating a garden curriculum that focuses on like whole child and getting kids outside and into the greenhouse that we have here. So it really is kind of blending the models of like traditional therapies coupled with this additional service of therapeutic horticulture and just offering them another space and another safe space where they can go learn, go process, go regulate, and just like create grounding skills, learn new things. So it's really like, yeah, getting off the ground and we're getting started, but really exciting that we have the space and the support here to offer a service such as this.
For sure. So, is this for kids who just feel like they need it, or is this integrated into science class? Like, where is this coming up in their school day?
Kind of all of the above.
Hmm.
We're really working to try and integrate as many students into the space as possible. So hopefully opening up for students who can just like drop in, for students who, yeah, are working with their science teachers. I would love to collaborate more with them and get as many teachers outside of science too, like anyone who wants to come into the greenhouse to do educational work, happy to support, as well as just kind of working with all students. We have a garden club that is out there weekly. So yeah, I think in my mind, it really is just whoever needs it and also whoever wants it. Whoever, is kind of uncertain about garden spaces and green spaces, just creating like a really welcoming green space for all of those opportunities that I think, yeah, I just listed.
Yeah, for sure. So, some of the things that you mentioned lead to the next thing I wanted us to talk about, which is, you know, we're going to talk about how to garden with kids, of course, but there are benefits to moms and dads, caregivers, and the kids all at once. Doesn't matter your age, right? So you spoke to how gardening has the ability to sort of calm you down, literally grounding, not just grounding because it's dirt, but grounding the psychological concept, right?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about what these opportunities are capable of in terms of mental health.
They're honestly endless. In my work experience, working in gardening with kids, teenagers, young adults, for your mental health, it's so beneficial to be outside. And I think for kids, school is a lot. And ever since COVID, like we really haven't broken away from the computers. And I think technology plays a huge role in our lives and it's a benefit to our lives. But I think that there needs to be a balance in that. And in terms of mental health, yeah, getting outside, really utilizing all five of your senses in the garden can be just like something that immediately is like a stress reduction. And teaching kids coping skills and grounding skills and those mindfulness techniques that can be used outside of the garden, but especially when you're in the garden, doing some breath work, but while holding an herb that like resonates with you or that you like the smell of, like lavender, things that can calm, as well as executive functioning and being able to set a goal, create a project, and move through that in terms of utilizing that in your school day, in your personal life. For kids, I think teaching them those things is so beneficial in the garden because it's results that they can actually see and witness. So it's kind of that like, you have to have patience, but it's also so gratifying to come in and like see what happened to your plant. Is it growing? Oh no, it's not. Like, what do I do? How do I problem solve that? So there's both this like anxiety and stress reduction while also these benefits for like social and emotional learning, as well as those executive functioning skills too.
That's fantastic. And, I just sort of wonder too, doing what you do, what is going on in our society? How are we shifting, in my opinion, in a positive way,
Mhm.
toward sort of realizing playing with plants, for lack of a better term, can really make you feel better? Like we're actually
Mhm.
acknowledging the science that exists there, and you are actually employed to do what you do, associated with a school district, associated with a major health system. What are we
Mhm.
getting right here all of a sudden, sort of?
Yeah, I think all of the above. It's such an honor to get to do this work and have the opportunity to get out there and just see what we can do, because it's so interesting that there's research and so much evidence-based science behind it, but it's always been there. I think the thing about gardening and about nature is like no matter where you come from in humanity, humans have been doing this for centuries. And so going back into that like ancestral knowledge, one, it brings people together because I think it breaks down barriers, and it makes nature feel accessible. And I think that's another part of this job that I love is it's bringing gardening to a place where it's open and available for everyone. Because the garden, it's not judgmental. It's not a place of prejudice. It's a place where I think people can come together.
Now, another benefit maybe specifically for kids, and you tell me about this because I know this is hitting right on what you do, is
Mhm.
just sort of the disconnection that American kids have with the sources of their food and how this sort of brings them back.
Yeah, for sure. I think, something wonderful that has, I feel like, taken off again are farmers markets and just going to your local market. And obviously, I think that there are so many factors in food in our society that do seem a little bit unfair in terms of, like poverty levels as well as like where you can get your food from and what seems accessible. So I really appreciate that these farmers markets and just like food stands and fruit stands and vegetable stands do feel like they're making a comeback. And with that, I feel like what I would also love to see make a comeback is the connection to that food and those places, and that, like the farm stand is not just like another store, that people working there, they grew that food. That food came from a place that's, not too far from your house. That you can go see it, you can visit it, you can learn from that. So that's something that I also feel really passionate about is people understanding where their food is from and supporting those growers and those farmers that are doing the most to get us nutritious food that's locally grown, and that they're like trying to educate others as well, which I think comes totally full circle with teaching kids about gardening, is showing them that, hey, this can be a vocational skill if you're interested in it. Like you have people and you have community and you have mentors that come together to grow food, to share food. And that's a really beautiful thing, because I was so shocked the first time I was working with a student and we were taking seeds out of a pepper. And I was like, oh, yeah, we got to save these. And this was a long time ago. But yeah, the look on their face was like, no, you just get rid of them. No, this grows another pepper. And I feel bad because I felt like I was a bit insensitive about it, because I was just like, everybody knows this. But everybody doesn't know that. So I also think getting straight back to the seed, literally, and going from seed all the way through the cycle to seed is super important for kids. And then once we have that foundation, it's okay, but where did this come from? So yeah, getting back into that we grow, I think eating seasonally too is something that is wonderful. And if, you can figure it out and you have the means to figure that out, that's another just like connection to the earth and to the seasons, and that we go through the seasons of our own lives. But, if we look around, like, so does the planet, so do all of the plants that we grow. So I think really getting into where does our food come from opens up a broader conversation for how do I fit into that cycle, even if I'm not the one growing the food, if I'm only the one eating it. It's still important to have those conversations, and to kind of understand and have appreciation for it, because I do think it brings so much appreciation and gratitude for the things where you know where they come from versus just the thing that you kind of got off the shelf, not really knowing who grew it or where it came from or how did this come to be, in my possession.
Absolutely. And I think too, when you do the gardening with them and they realize how much work goes into that plant, how much care
Mhm.
they put into that plant, and then realizing these farmers did this a million times over. The
Mhm.
everything that's on their table at the farmers market, they feel that close to all of these foods, right? Benefits to parents or caregivers exclusively, I think is a good topic too. And you touched on a little bit the idea that you are doing this activity with your child or with your whomever, your niece, your nephew, that actually produces something. And the idea that you're passing on this skill. Do you think that's especially satisfying even for people like you?
Oh, yeah. It's so fun. And I think it could be translated to, anything that you enjoy. When you enjoy that in community with other people, it just brings it to another level of just like the magic of people coming together like-minded, doing something, whether it's for, production, whether it's for fun, whether it's for, like community building or donation, whether it's just spending time together. But in the garden, I feel like there's so many things that parents can teach their kids that with metaphors that they don't really have to say, it just kind of happens. And I feel like in my experience, the garden is a place, and when you set it up as a safe place and you're doing something and you're working on something, because you're grounding naturally in that space, because you're working with your hands, maybe you're picking weeds, maybe you're sowing seeds, you're regulated and your body is in a state of I can have kind of hard conversations if needed.
Hmm.
So I think for parents, that can be a really lovely space to meet your kids. I'm not saying that you always have to have the deepest conversations in the garden, but I think sometimes those just start to happen.
Well, that was such a great conversation with Ash Emmerich from AHN and all of the good work that she is doing there. But we're going to drill down a little further on how to actually implement practices at your home, wherever you're gardening, that allow you and your child to work together well in the gardening space. And to do that, we're going to lean on Dr. Mark Miller and Gina Walter from the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden. Here they are. All of these things that you guys see at your facility are completely transferable to home, which is what I want to get to next, right? So, what are some best practices for people at home to sort of create the situation where they are gardening with their children in a way that is fairly stress free, right? Because I think about like the Instagram reels with the sun coming through the trees, and everyone's in cotton dresses, and the kids are running through the field, and everybody's happy. And I compare that to being in the garden with my own children, where I'm like, don't step on that. No, they're like doing all of these things that are terrifying to somebody trying to actually build a garden for that year. So, what are some ways that we can make sure that we're actually working together? We're keeping kids where they should be, keeping their hands as gentle as they should be. What are tips that you give kids at the facility?
Well, I'm going to start and say that this is rather ironic because I'm very OCD about my garden, but you really need to give up a little bit of control. There needs to be a part of the garden where kids can just play in the mud and manipulate things in a gross motor kind of way and just get dirty and yes, smash a few things, and I'm sorry, it is important. So
That's a great tip. So we have one part of the garden at least that is reserved for them. And if they are too rough or stepping in the wrong spot, it's fine.
yep,
I love that. All
yeah.
right. What else? What else do we have?
I would
Gina?
say start small. I think a lot of times when people, especially if you're new to gardening, you see all these grand ideas and you want to try to do everything at once, but that can actually be very discouraging because then you're like, "Oh my gosh, I have all these ideas, but I'm not getting anything done." So start small and include your children in if you're starting a garden, include your children in what do you like to eat? What do you like to smell? What do you like to touch? And then they have some ownership of the garden as well, and then they might actually want to take better care of the garden space.
I actually hear two tips inside of what you're saying there, Gina. I
Yeah.
hear the start small, but
Mhm.
also grow what you eat, which is a classic gardening tip anyway, right?
Mhm.
But in this case, we're talking about growing what you eat so that your kids are more engaged with it, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's a great idea.
Yeah.
How about some fruits, vegetables, herbs, maybe flowers, but I guess I like the whole sensory experience of growing something that you then consume, right? What sort of plants could we start with maybe that are especially hardy, maybe especially difficult to kill, that are practically weeds? What belongs in that category?
Well, again, I would incorporate the kids in on the whole planning process. So, hey, what is it that we like to eat? So, okay, because kids will eat what they grow. There's such a sense of pride. Hey, I grew all those peas, and I would lobby for following through and incorporating them or sharing cooking tips with them too. I mean, there's the edible schoolyard in California is a great example of all these school kids not only grow the plants and grow the produce, but then they go to a kitchen immediately and they learn how to cook it. And that's such a great skill, and it gets everyone involved, and it tastes good, and who doesn't love food?
Right.
In terms of specific plants, maybe you like eggplant and I don't, so it's kind of hard to say, but I would say always get some sunflowers in there because they're great for the pollinators and they do provide food with the seeds, and they're just cheerful and kids like them.
Well, and practically a magic trick, right, is when you can take the sunflower head and put it on the grill, right? The kids
There
are
you
gonna be
go.
like, "Wow."
And it moves with the sun too, which is really cool to watch and something that gives you an entree into talking about different natural processes.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. I also like there are a lot of herbs that are plenty hardy, right? I mean, try to kill chives. Go for it. I dare you, right? I mean,
Right.
we
I
have a lot of
planted one, now I have 100 of them. So
yeah, we have a lot of greens that are pretty easy and pretty hardy, right? What are a few of those guys?
there are always going to be annuals that are not going to overwinter for you. But one of my favorites is arugula.
Mm, I love arugula.
Yeah. It's good. And actually, it sometimes overwinters.
Well, and
So,
I think that's an interesting one too, because in a lot of these greens are because they don't have that sanitized watery flavor that you get from like iceberg lettuce from the grocery store, right? So if you're exposing your children to arugula, I grow Mizuna, for instance, which is a Japanese green.
yep,
There are a lot of different sort of not spicy like pepper spicy, but just sort of like spicy in terms of flavor, a little bit of bitterness in there that you're really expanding their palate, right?
absolutely. Corn salad or mache. I don't know if you've tried that. That's a good one. Yeah. Who doesn't love a little bit of flavor? So, yeah.
And we have science out there that shows that kids who are involved with gardening, with growing their food, that the nutritional outcomes are better, right?
That's
So
right.
everything you're saying is proven. What about things like hardscaping which, for people who don't know what that word means, we're just talking about the rocks and the boulders and the wood and, the raised beds and all the things that you put in your yard to kind of guide kids toward where to step, where to be, right? That stuff's helpful.
It is. The landscape designer in me would say, please try to unify your hardscape. Don't have stone over here and brick over there and cement over here and wood over there. Try to unify. I think that'll make the garden look better, and it's easier for the kids to know where they can and can't go.
So, Mark, your garden is probably far more gorgeous than mine. I'm a bit more on the DIY side. So if I have brick, it might be over here, and if I have stone, it might be over here.
That's okay.
Whatever was at Construction Junction is what is in that corner.
I love Construction Junction. I think that's an awesome place. Yeah.
And just a final thought, guys, when we talk about children in gardens, and I mean children all the way up to young adulthood, right? We're talking about the whole span. We are in a time period where we're trying to get our kids away from video games. We're trying to get them away from computers. We know about the sort of toxicity that can exist in social media and, sometimes just socially in person at school. What does emphasizing time outside, time in the garden serve for that purpose? And why is that especially important right now?
Really, for all of the reasons you just mentioned. I personally think that it's essential to have time in nature to understand what it is to be a human being on this planet, and where we fit and who we are. And it helps kids to know what they like and what they don't like. It's just absolutely essential. But what do I know? I'm a boomer with an Android, so maybe a perspective from somebody younger, like, yeah, it's a good idea.
I would say that as great as technology is and social media really connects people together, it can also be really exhausting, constantly consuming media. And there can be a lot of positives online, but there can also be a lot of negatives. So just giving yourself permission to step away from that and get outside where nature doesn't care about all of that. You can connect, you can feel, again, going back to the mental benefits, just more at ease. It's very calming. And it's important to teach children from an early age that nature isn't something to be feared. It's something to embrace. And we are part of nature. So it's important that we take care of it, because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be around anymore. And I think a lot of times people take that for granted. So it's just important to learn that you can't take it for granted. And a lot of the responsibility falls on us to care for nature. And part of that is learning about how it works, like Mark mentioned, and how we're connected to it.
Well, thank you folks so much for joining us on 412 Kids. Well, 412 Kids family, I hope you got as much out of those discussions as I did. I am certainly in desperate need of some of those stepping stones. And I also love the idea of painting that one rock for each child so that they can really take ownership over a certain part of the garden. Those are on my to-do list for sure. But before you go anywhere, let's move on to our 412 for You segment of the podcast. These can be headlines from the past week that are applicable to parents or kids. These can be events coming up or even just quirky facts. If you ever have a suggestion for something that should go in this segment, please just send me an email at amackey@post-gazette.com. But for today, we are going to celebrate that 17 local parks are going to be getting some major makeovers. This is through the Pennsylvania Parks Fund and a brand new grant program they have. Among those 17 will be parks such as Bellevue Memorial Park, Dormont Park, Millville Riverfront Park, and many more. They're receiving up to $50,000 for these repairs. And obviously, this is a great thing for kids and a great thing for communities overall. So we are thrilled to talk about that. Also, Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful recently hosted their competition for kids to sort of express their feelings about litter. And we have a local first place winner. So we are talking about Nora Buchanan. She's a third grader at George Washington Elementary in Bethel Park, and she won first place honors for her poster about litter. And we are just so proud of you, Nora. Great job. And lastly, shout out to our friends at Pittsburgh Botanic Garden on this one. Mark your calendars for June 29th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. They are celebrating International Mud Day. And that is exactly what it sounds like. There is going to be a giant mud pit that both kids and adults are allowed to play in. You're allowed to get as dirty as you want. You can do whatever you want within reason. The only suggestion is that you bring a towel for when you are done. And if you're not a member, this comes free with admission. The idea is that people from around the world are engaging in this activity at the same time, gets everybody closer to nature, and provides lots of fun for everybody all at the same time. So friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I have been your host. My name is Abby Mackey. Our editor is Polly Higgins. Our producers are Matt Rosenberg and Jacob Comer. And as always, it is our privilege to be with you on your parenting journey as you raise your 412 kids. See you next time.